So hi everyone, my name is Mirek Mazal. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm doing a talk on starting the MuseScore design team. It's more of a talk on what's to come than what has been, because it's just starting out. So what is MuseScore? MuseScore is this score editing program where you can write scores, edit scores, share scores. It has an online platform as well that you can share scores to, and that you can download scores from. So my goal wasn't just to start a design team for MuseScore. It was also to figure out how to do user-centered design effectively in volunteer-based communities. I used to be a volunteer in the user experience design team for LibreOffice. So I had some experience with that, and I feel like consistently, not just with LibreOffice, but with various open source design teams, one thing that felt like was missing was the user. There was not enough research being done. There often wasn't a solid basis for some decisions being made. A lot of designers were making decisions based on their own experience without doing research, and I haven't really seen user research being done on a larger basis in open source projects. I'm also working part-time as a user experience designer. I'm studying some subjects in human-computer interaction, so I was coming from that as well. And this is a book that I was basing a lot of the processes that I tried to incorporate and that I'm going to try to incorporate into the design team. It's Designing for the Digital Age. It was written by Kim Goodwin, who used to be vice president at Cooper. Cooper is one of the largest and most famous design consultancies, and it's a really huge book, and it's very detailed, and it goes through the entire process of user experience design, user-centered user experience design. So when I say user-centered design, what do I mean? Well, Wikipedia defines it as a framework of processes in which the needs, wants, and limitations of end users are given extensive attention at each stage. That means that you do research at the beginning, then that research, you usually have personas, which are, you take the data from that research and make fictional people, fictional characters that exemplify the patterns that you found in that research that you did. And then once you start designing, you test, you keep testing, you validate hypotheses, you make sure that what you're making is being actually useful to the people that you're making it for, and you keep the personas in mind throughout the whole process. Why is this important? Well, it lets everyone understand the needs, the workflows, and the mental models of the people involved in the in whatever you're designing. So that basically makes you able to understand what different kinds of people are using your software. It's not just you, it's not just your surroundings. It makes you aware of who all is using your software. And it also gives you a better perspective on what the needs are. You're not just copying competition. It gets the whole team thinking about the target users. It makes it clear who the target users are and aren't. You know who you're designing for. There's a concept called the elastic user, which is basically, sometimes you hear arguments from developers, oh, we need, I don't know, we definitely need a wizard for this because it's just too hard. But then at other times, oh, it's fine, you know, they'll figure it out because they're clever and then they can look through documentation, right? And so you have these opposing views on who the user is, and it's the same user, and you're designing, you know, you have a very schizophrenic interface if you're designing that way. The personas help you keep grounded on who the actual users are going to be and what their needs are. And it resolves arguments. So if you have data to back up your arguments, then it's much easier to resolve them. I'm not sure what I did there, sorry. And it also helps you keep a leg up on the competition because you actually know the needs. You're not just copying blindly what the others are doing. So what I tried to do is get a local meetup running. First of all, I wasn't really experienced with running something locally. I've only been a volunteer in web-based design communities, and there were a lot of inefficiencies in doing things on the web, in communication, in setting times. So I was wondering, what's it going to be like if you do it locally? So I started a meetup on meetup.com. The idea was to start with research, start doing research as a first step, get some personas, as I mentioned, and then once we have the personas ready, the personas would be the basis of everything and would inform all the design going forward. We just start solving user experience problems. We'd do the process was you do some testing at the beginning, or you'd look for some hypotheses, or people would have some ideas of what the bugs were. Maybe you'd have some bugs in the bug tracker. You'd do research and ideation for the bugs that you identified. Then you use your personas and put them in the scenarios in which they're running into this bug, and try to find solutions for personas in those scenarios. Then you do some wireframes, you test those. Maybe you go to mock-up phase and test on the mock-ups themselves, because sometimes you don't really need wireframing phase. It's easier sometimes to just do the mock-ups. And then we do testing, and once we figured out, oh, okay, this works for people, we'd move on to the next bug. So really a straightforward process that can be applied not just in MuseScore, but in other communities as well. So how did it go? So it didn't go that well, and it was partly because I didn't really have that much time to devote to it. So this is the first meeting where we set up, what it's going to be like. We talked about what our plans are, what the vision is, and that was nice. But then the next meeting, I had a set of 4 completely different people. So I didn't expect the base to be quite so changeable, but it still kept going. We did, the next time there were 4 of us, some from the first meeting, some from the second meeting, and we did some stakeholder interviews to find out what the stakeholders were looking for, who the users were, etc. And then the next meeting, we had 6 people. That was the busiest one, I think. I think this is it. And we were still doing stakeholder interviews. We were talking about the user experience design process in general. And it seemed to be working relatively well. People seemed to be motivated because these people, they were coming into it because they wanted to learn the user experience design process. They didn't really have experience with it. So it was interesting to them, but at the same time, they didn't have that much time to devote, which actually showed up afterwards. We were starting to do user research prep, and there weren't that many people coming. First, the next meeting, one meeting had to be canceled. The next meeting, 2 people came, and we just talked about user research. And then the meeting afterwards, we started preparing for user research, who we could, where we could find people, what people are we looking for, etc., that kind of stuff. And that last meeting was kind of a bit disorganized, so it might have discouraged people because nobody came the next time. And then the next time, again, nobody came. And I wasn't really willing to devote the time to it. I had school, I had work. So I put it on hiatus for a while, and then started up again in January. And it was kind of lukewarm. It started out a bit slow, but at the same time we were able to have a meetup. We did do 3 interviews in January. There were some problems with the interviews, so that makes me actually inspired to do more work in terms of teaching people how to do user interviews, putting more effort into resources, because the interviews that we had were more marketing driven and more focused on the current software rather than the users. So that's where we are now. Lessons learned. Well, I learned that people really need resources and that there's a shortage of quickly digestible resources for people to use and people to get involved right away. If I show people designing for the digital age, it's such a huge, complex book that it discourages them from contributing. So what I'd like to do now is put more time and effort into the resources that there are and trying to find resources. So if you have any tips, let me know. So another thing, volunteers come and go. I can't count on the same people to keep contributing. I have to be prepared for new people coming in and how to integrate them as fast as possible. Maybe some easy hacks would be good to get people integrated. People's time is precious, so you really need to also focus on motivation and keeping them feeling like their time is being used as well as possible. And the people that are coming are generally inexperienced, so you really do need to teach them how to do user experience design. These people that were coming to the meetups were also not experienced in music theories, so that's also something to keep in mind. When you're working with a local group, you're less likely to find, if you have specialized software, people who are interested in that specialized software. So that's where online communities really have the upper hand, because it's easier to find people. So going forward, I'm going to be gathering resources, making more resources. I'm going to be trying to build a stronger community. Something that I was missing was another person to help me keep the things going, because I really was running out of time. I didn't really have the time to devote to this, and it would be helpful to have someone else. So if there's anyone here who'd like to get involved, let me know. Especially if you're more experienced, but even if you're not, there's lots of stuff to do. And I'd like to actually do a mix of offline and online communities, because both are useful. I'd like to define the roles better, something that, as I've mentioned, I don't really see user research being done often, and researchers can actually have a different set of skills than your standard interaction designer. And that's something that you could use different people for, right? If somebody isn't comfortable making wireframes, isn't comfortable, going through, layout and graphic theory, they can do this. They can ask questions. They can gather data. They can make personas. That's a completely different, and I think in the open source world, relatively unexplored role that we could have. Also, research participants. You don't have to know anything. You can just participate in interviews. And we absolutely need those people. So if you have no skills and can talk, then you're perfect for open source volunteering. And there's different stuff. Visual designers, of course, field experts, people who know the domain, interaction designers, motion designers as well. And I'd like to iterate on the process a bit more. I mentioned the process before. Now I'm also thinking about doing Lean UX. So in Lean UX, instead of doing research up front and then making personas from that, you do proto-personas based on your assumptions of who the users are going to be, and then you validate them. Then you basically grow them into full-blown personas. So you start with the fictional characters, but over time, they get validated through actual research. The benefit of that is we could start working on the bugs right away with an idea of who the users are, and then we'll refine the personas over time. And I want to aim for replicability because I'd really like other open source communities to also focus more on user research. And if that's something that you'd like to do in your community, we could connect up and find ways to incorporate user research and testing, basically user-centered design into an existing design team or into a new design team if you'd like to start one. So let me know your thoughts. This is my email address. And I'd like to take comments, questions, thoughts right now, if you have any.
Thank you for the talk, and I have a question. You mentioned that you are looking for a mix of offline and online communities here. Why? Do you think it's not possible to do the same in only online, distributed way, like more?
Right. So yeah. Okay. So the question was, why a mix of offline and online communities? I think the advantage of offline communities can be, well, you have stronger bonds. It's easier to coordinate. And it's also easier if you're going to be conducting user interviews, then ideally you'd have two people at user interviews, one to take notes, one to ask questions, so that each person can focus a bit and the person taking notes can fill in if the other person doesn't know what to ask. And that's always easier to coordinate locally.
Yeah,
So,
I agree, it makes sense.
yeah.
Do you believe it can be also done online only?
Oh yeah. I think online only has some certain advantages of its own. It's easier to find volunteers. The volunteers tend to be more motivated because they're coming online. They may be associated with the software itself, so there are definite advantages to doing it online as well. And you can still do local interviews, but generally alone. So yeah.
And
So
one more question, which city is it?
Prague. This was in Prague,
Oh, okay.
Czech Republic.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to know, how did you decide on the frequency of the meetups and how did you feel about that?
So the frequency, it was partly based on the first meetings that I had, how frequently others felt like they could devote time to this, and it was also partly based on my schedule because I'm working, I have school, so I needed to coordinate these things, and it turned out to be, the idea was to have it once a week, but then sometimes it fell through because some people couldn't go, I sometimes couldn't go, so that's how we decided.
So with the lean UX approach, I see one danger that you create your personas that you think of, and then when you interview people, you only take in what validates your persona that you had in mind, and kind of miss the rest of it.
Right.
Is that something that you experienced with that approach, or was it not a problem?
So the question is, with Lean UX, if there's a danger of just incorporating the stuff from the proto-personas, or just, the proto-personas being very much like influencing the course of the research. And I agree with you. That's actually why I didn't do Lean UX at first, because that's something that does concern me. If you do research afterwards and start with proto-personas, your final personas are more likely to be like the original proto-personas. That said, it does have the advantage of you being able to start right away on fixing user experience bugs and not having to worry about that. So this is something that you need to keep in mind while doing the research. I'm not sure if there's an easy solution, but really try to be objective when incorporating that research in. Okay. Yeah.
When you were looking for your volunteers, did you look for people who were already familiar with MuseScore from the MuseScore community, or were you looking for people who were more interested in UX?
So the question is, when I was looking for volunteers, was I looking for people interested in MuseScore or people interested in UX? good question. So I just started a meetup, and I was kind of freeballing it. So it was more like, people who are interested in open source or user experience design. I tagged this event on meetup.com using these various tags, music as well, and the people that came generally were interested in user experience design and weren't experienced in it, and the thing that motivated them in coming to the meetups was learning how to do user experience design. I'm not sure if that was because of the description of the project, if people interested in music didn't feel like they could get involved. I'm not sure, but it attracted the user experience newbie crowd. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Any recommendations on how to do user-centered design, or any knowledge about other projects that have incorporated this in a volunteer-based way?
I think I would say just keep the documentation, all of it. Like if you design personas, you have to make that public, available on a wiki or something, and you have to keep everyone on, like in the project, involved with that.
I'll just repeat that. So the tip was to keep everything documented, to have the personas and the user research findings on the wiki.
And I also don't know if you make YouTube videos, because I know that some people like to watch things instead of just reading it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you make video tutorials on YouTube, it's actually very, very good, because my grandmother don't know how to install video coding. But if she looks at the laptop and sees it at the video, she knows how to do it.
So the tip was to make videos as well, because they're, for some people, more easy to digest. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a comment about, I was debating the use of personas in general with a colleague the other week, with Garrett. We were talking about the use of either proto-personas, I guess proto-personas in particular, but also general personas, how useful it is, because a lot of people are just uncomfortable with them.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, like a lot of projects, they always have this, like, the user they talk about. They wouldn't use, like, the personas, right? But they're like, oh, the user would do this, and the user would do that.
Yep.
So all projects always use them anyway, just that they call the personas the user.
Yeah. So just to repeat that, the comment was that he and Andreas and Garrett, a colleague, were debating whether personas make sense, how useful they are, and especially proto-personas, if they're useful at all. But at the same time, we refer to persona. We whenever we're doing design, even if we don't have personas, we keep using the word the user. The user would like this, the user would like something. So in our heads, there is a persona, we just don't actually put it down. And I agree with that. And I think personas are useful. I think they get a bad rap because oftentimes what you see are proto-personas that don't really have any that aren't backed by research. So it's, yeah, so you could have the elastic user problem still, because you don't really have a person to actually work from.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.